Hello and welcome to Autosport's Top 50 Drivers of 2024. I'm Kevin Turner and I'm joined in the studio today by Gary Watkins and Haydn Cobb to run through the drivers who made the list.
And those who didn't, of course.
And those who didn't. Thank you, Gary, interjecting already. We started you in to go.
We'll get the controversy going.
Yeah, we will do, yes. And in this episode, this first video, we are going to look at the drivers from 50th place to 41st. But before we get into that, we should talk about how we actually put the list together. So Haydn, you helped me and James Newbold start the... Well, James Newbold did the hard work, let's be honest. But tell us a little bit about how we get the 50 together.
Okay, so I like to think it's a scientific and methodical choreographed process, but really it's hours and hours of back and forth and carving and changing right up to the last minute. But I guess the overview is starting from the top 10s decided by the reporters of the respective series. Has to have an overview, and then it's a case of arguing who goes up and down, if they have dual programs, whether that rises their ranking or indeed drops their ranking. And yeah, a huge email long list goes around to the series reporters who then may put their own inputs in of who should be go up, go down, get dropped entirely, and by and large, after a few hours, it comes together.
I'm going to say not a few hours, a bit longer than that, actually. And I'm saying that as someone who's been involved in every one of these since the very first Autosport Top 50 back in 2003. And I'm going to
2002.
say... 2002.
2002
even,
was the first
even
one.
longer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that, we've had a few... very heated arguments and a few sulks by some reporters along the way as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably fair to say that, the top 10s are our basis because obviously, it's the experts in the paddocks, but we move them around depending on if they've got another programme. So the classic
That's
example,
key, isn't it? Another programme.
Yeah, so Sebastian Buemi is the classic example, someone from your world, Gary. You usually bump him up the list because he's been consistently good in the World Endurance Championship for years and years. And then Formula E, back in the day when he started, boosted him up higher in the list.
Well, exactly.
Because he was good at it, and the last few years it's completely fallen away, so it tends to actually drag him down a bit. But that's just an example.
I think just a couple of years ago we had a situation where the positions of a couple of drivers in my top 10 for the WEC were reversed because of the sort of extra top 50 points, if you like, that they got from Formula E. So Buemi dropped down, and I can't remember who it was, moved up. So that sort of just shows you, how influential a second programme can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And Haydn, obviously, the other thing that we feed into it is the hierarchy of the championships, right, which some of them are obvious. Like Formula One and World Rally Championship are the pinnacles of their respective branches of the sport. So those top drivers are always going to be somewhere high in the 50. But some of the other championships have to move around depending on how competitive it is in any given season. So we have to factor that in as well, don't we?
That's right. It's not like, say, the FIA's grading of their championships in terms of that. If you're using a super license example where you win a certain championship, you get a certain amount of super license points, and that obviously goes up in ranking from karting to Formula One. But you're right, that moves around. And also the big one-off set-piece events as well. You would certainly say if somebody puts in a phenomenal performance at Le Mans or another sort of blue rebound event, that gives them an extra boost as well.
I'm going to say my top 10 for the WEC review is very much influenced by Le Mans. Whatever we say, Le Mans is still the pinnacle, isn't it? And it's still the race that does mean more than the championship. I think as this new era of sports car racing is growing and gathering momentum, I think the championship has more worth than it did a few years ago with more manufacturers. But Le Mans is still the pinnacle because it has that media reach, doesn't it? And of course the history. Whereas obviously the World Championship is a shorter history, it's a stop-start history, and it's a checkered history.
Yeah, but that's a good point about the competitiveness of the series and how many manufacturers and top drivers there are in any given championship. It usually means that the number in the top 50, the representation goes up, if you like.
Well, I'm going to make a point about that later. Actually.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. He's already he's got a smile on his face that suggests trouble ahead. Well, actually, let's take a look at number 50 because we can actually talk about one of the reasons why this is so difficult. So in 50s, Antonio Felix da Costa, who was 6th in Formula E with 4 wins, but the person that he knocked out at the last minute was Brock Feeney, who was the Australian Supercars runner-up. They both won 25% of their races, but that's pretty much where the similarity ends, because you've got effectively a very strong domestic touring car championship where they're driving V8s versus an international single-seater series with all electric cars. So comparing them, we realise is never going to be definitive. So Haydn, I think in the end, we probably put da Costa in because it's an international championship. You could make a case for Formula E being the strongest championship outside of F1 in terms of the individual drivers.
Yeah, like you say, if you wanted to give those sort of imaginary points, I think, even if they've got the same amount of wins and largely had similar seasons, you would edge it because it is that international championship. It is difficult. I think 50th for the last few years, for different reasons, has probably been one of the hardest positions to finalise, because it is that context behind it of, well, you always want to name 5, 6, 7, 51st place drivers, but there's no such thing as that.
Can I just tell viewers and listeners that we actually had, for 51st place, there were 10 people tied for it.
yeah. And that's a totally
That's
different...
because we tell everyone who didn't make it that they were in 51st.
Yeah. And so it's that sort of cut-off point of, you've really got to have sort of proven your case, have a strong argument to make, okay, granted 50th, but still the place there. And that's sort of where da Costa came into it in terms of all the little elements you've mentioned there on his season.
Can I just say about your imaginary points? I think our imaginary points are better than the FIA's point system for awarding super licenses, actually.
Just an unnecessary poking at the FIA for Christmas. Brilliant.
That's me banned from something next year.
Yeah.
Actually, Gary, we're going to come to you next anyway, because perhaps the biggest name not on the list, that American fans in particular will be going, I cannot believe that the Indianapolis 500 winner, Joseph Newgarden, is not in the 50. Now, the first reason that he's not in there is because he was only 7th in the IndyCar rankings, and there are only 5 IndyCar drivers in the list. So that was one reason. But of course, he did also win the Daytona 24 Hours, and normally winning those 2 races would put you in a strong position. But
well, I'm going to say win the sorry for the listeners.
I mean, that's a little harsh.
I've used air quotes there. Yes, he was in the winning car, but he was a bit player. 4 drivers: Felipe Nasr, his full season teammate Dane Cameron in what was the championship winning Porsche Penske Motorsport entry, and then the final driver, although not the final driver, as we're going to learn, was Matt Campbell, who was part of PPM in IMSA in 23, but switched over for his full-time program to WEC in 24, but sort of came back for Daytona and the other long races, Sebring and Petit Le Mans at Road Atlanta. And really, that race for me, if you look at the winning Porsche car, it was the Felipe and Matt show. It wasn't Cameron and Newgarden. They did, I think, between them 7 hours. So the remainder of the race was done by the other 2. They pulled the hard work there, and and it's about who was quickest. The team put in the quick drivers, especially if you look from the sort of the sharp end of the race in the final hours. I think from like dawn on Sunday morning, it was only those 2, Campbell and Nasr. So the other 2 were left out of the cycle.
Yeah, I was the big advocate when the discussions were happening of getting Newgarden in for those big event set pieces, the Indy 500, Daytona 24 Hours.
Which good point. There's
push them in.
2 of the 3 biggest races in America.
Yeah,
presumably we would say.
But you're right. When we did dig into the numbers of the time in the car, the average pace of Newgarden in that. Yeah, he did an efficient job. He gave them time to the others to rest, but he didn't do anything sort of sparkling in Daytona, which is his part-time thing, wasn't his full-time employment. So he held up an end, if you want to use a cricket analogy. But that sort of wasn't his starring performance. I think in the Indy 500 he did phenomenal job, that sort of final 2 laps fight, and
It's interesting, isn't it, actually, that here one minute I'm bigging up the role of the Le Mans 24 Hours in my driver rankings, and now we're sort of playing down Indy 500 in Newgarden.
Yeah.
But it's because of the IndyCar rankings, I would say.
Yeah.
There's partly that. And I think it's also, this is a good example of why it's performance rather than result, because you could just do this list based on the most successful drivers, wins and whatever. But we're trying to factor in co-drivers, teams, machinery and all the rest of it. That's what makes it interesting to me, because anyone can just do a list of totting up the wins from a given season. But Haydn, is there anyone else that's 51st, basically, in your book, or that you think should have made it into the 50, and you disagree with the process that we had? Because I think it's probably fair to say that no one at Autosport agrees with all 50. That would be ridiculous. So we're all compromising to a certain degree.
No, the two big ones that we were sort of on the fence was Newgarden and Brock Feeney, as you mentioned. There's always a case of sort of British touring car drivers that just trying to creep in there, and we've managed to get two in, which isn't so often.
Yeah, we've got two this year.
Yeah,
we'll get to those.
Yeah, well, that's actually there are years when we've only had one.
That's
and
right.
Sometimes I would actually suggest that it was a token one.
Yeah,
as well.
That raises a good point, actually.
Not to piss Alan Gow off.
We do. No, yeah, you're working your way down the list of people in motorsport to annoy.
Come on.
But we do try and spread the joy a little bit, because if it's the difference between the 15th best driver in Formula One and the outstanding person in World Rallycross or TCR World Tour, you're going to pick the outstanding person in those to give it a little bit of variety and interest and spread the joy. Right, well, let's carry on, because we've only done one so far.
Oh,
Are we actually going to talk about
We're
some
gonna
of the missing ones?
Missing ones? Have you got more missing ones you want to throw in?
Well, I mean, I just in my world, in the magazine today, we have those who didn't make the cut from last year, don't we? We have a panel there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Antonio Fuoco, who was for me one of the stars last year, isn't there.
But you can't really criticise that, because that's because of your own list.
Well, I know exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm not criticising that, but I just sort of as
honourable mention.
As an explainer, for me, he was one of the standout drivers at Ferrari last year. He had those poles, the debut pole for the car, the pole on debut for the 499P Le Mans Hypercar at Sebring, the Le Mans pole, and the comeback when they were delayed at Le Mans. He was outstanding. This year, the star driver there is Nicholas Nielsen, who we will be talking about a bit later in the top 50.
Quite a bit later, I would
yes,
suggest. Not
good
to
point.
spoil things too much.
And so it's just like, for me, Nielsen emerged as the lead player in that car this year, and he had the star performance at Le Mans, which sort of, focus him centrally in the mind.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say that if drivers haven't made the 50, it doesn't mean that we don't think they're any good this year.
No.
It's more that we're elevating those 50. That's the way I try and look at it, because we're trying to big these drivers up and point out some fantastic things that happened during the season. We're not trying to use it to criticise people that aren't in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, Samuel, let's get on to number 49. It is an F1 driver, Esteban Ocon. Obviously, effectively the second Alpine driver in the end. But Haydn, I think he's a bit underrated, personally, but not necessarily in this list, because he had a very odd season and obviously clashed with Pierre Gasly's teammate at Monaco and all that, but still turned it on occasions.
As you say, an odd season in terms of when they came into the year, Alpine this is, with an undercooked car, and they were, both him and Gasly were quite openly struggling with it, but the progress came throughout the year. I think what's made his life difficult is that internal fractions, and that's sort of taken the focus in his season compared to the performances he has put in, and that's why he's on this list of this section. It's had a solid year, I think that's fair to say, and certainly that 2-3 podium in Brazil, leading for a number of laps in the wet, putting in a performance and results in the end well above where that team and that car was at that point of the year. So he had those moments of shining, but nothing that really sort of drove the narrative for him.
Is it, I like to draw an analogy with the Oscars, films released sort of in the run up to the Oscars, which is in March, sort of back end of the year, early in the year, tend to do better in the Oscars than films released in June or whatever. Is this, that Interlagos performance and some other strong performances at the end of the year, is that fresh in our mind?
The
recency bias, yeah.
Which
we talked about.
During the process, and I think that was always the worry. I think you're right. That can happen, but like you say, when you rank him against the other Formula One drivers, this was his a position in that list. So there was obviously a gravity to this part of the list.
Or should we just say, he basically deserves to be on the list because he dragged a dog of a car onto the podium?
I mean, let's also remember he did pull away from. There were two people that actually showed something against Max Verstappen in that Interlagos drive in the wet. One was Charles Leclerc when they were fighting wheel to wheel, and the other one was Esteban Ocon when he actually drove away from Verstappen for periods in the race before the final restart. So, he then did. He did get jumped at the final restart, and given their history into that very corner, I thought maybe he would have fought a little bit harder, but he probably had the eye on the bigger picture there. It wasn't really worth it, was it? So,
and he probably knew that it was going to be a struggle.
Yes, his expectation probably was that, wasn't it? Yes. Okay, well, let's carry on. Let's get on to number 48, which is Isaac Hadjar, the Formula 2 runner-up. And I mean, if you win 4 feature races in the season in Formula 2, I mean, quite often that's enough to win the championship anyway.
Yeah. Especially when there are no one else won more than 3.
Yes, most wins, yeah.
And in a year that there were so many winners.
Yes. 18 winners in total.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Very, yeah.
What does that say about the level of Formula 2? Does that mean it's absolutely good, or does it mean it's not actually very
well? Is
very
it a function of the new car and teams getting on top of it at different times at different tracks?
Yeah,
because Prema, everyone expected,
swings,
but both Antonelli and Kimi Antonelli and Oliver Behrman both had interesting seasons that you wouldn't on paper say warrants them both getting into F1, but they both are. I think that's probably indicative of Prema's issues, really.
Huge performance swings, driver by driver, team by team on this year, going round by round. I think Hadjar's probably a perfect example. Like say that 4 feature wins, but when the lows were
proper wins,
exactly, a proper race.
But when the lows were lows, he really did have a low in terms of fluffing the title decider in Abu Dhabi with the stall and things like that. So I to be honest, I was one that was potentially trying to push Hadjar a little bit down, but again, maybe that is a bit of recency bias because you say you've got to look at his season as a whole.
You couldn't push him much further down because he's out the 50s.
I'm being kind to say when I'm pushing him down, I'm pushing him off.
Ooh.
But
so who would you have put in his place?
Well, this was the whole New Garden or
see.
Type
okay,
thing.
Yeah. Not another Formula 2 driver.
No. Okay. This was more of a case of those that missed out and then shuffling accordingly. But I could see firm cases for a couple we've already mentioned. But Hadjar was a bit of a not entirely sure. But yeah,
I still think 4 feature wins is pretty impressive, isn't it? Even if it did go all a little bit.
Yeah,
it's
true. And as of time of recording, probably will be a Formula 1 driver for next year.
I think it'd be very interesting to see how he handles the pressure because he makes Max Verstappen look mild-mannered in the car, doesn't he? So that could be quite interesting over the radio.
Yeah.
There'll be lots of bleeping, I expect. Yeah. That's if he gets in there, of course. Number 47, the first of our British touring car drivers, Tom Ingram. I was very disappointed that Marcus Simmons, who wrote this entry, didn't mention his fantastic driving at the Goodwood Revival in a TBR Griffith, but maybe that says more about me than it does about Ingram's season. But I mean, fantastic season. He was pretty unlucky, really, not to win it. Gary? Did you manage to follow much of the British touring car season?
I'm afraid I didn't this year. But
some fantastic racing at the front between Ingram and Jake Hill and Ash Sutton, but Hill and Ingram I thought were absolute class. Might be giving away another person further into the list. But
in a strange way with that battle, it seemed to get better, but also the right side of fair and fierce as the stakes got higher, and that finale was phenomenal. But I think Ingram probably reflects on his season and thinks, well, couldn't have done much more in that title fight, and there weren't things that were in his control or his fault for the reasons they didn't say get the title. But as a performance over the year, did a phenomenal job.
He basically, he lost it on an exclusion that was nothing to do with him, technical infringement, and the car just hit the accelerate Hyundai just didn't work in a certain level of greasy.
Yeah,
funnily enough,
strange.
used to be the BMW problem.
Yeah.
Greasy conditions, and there are a couple of points in the season where that, including the finale, where he just
didn't quite
it
come
just got
together.
away from him.
Yeah.
But I thought he was absolutely superb this season. And we've done our British Touring Car podcast review, so we won't carry too much on about that. So 46. Yuki Tsunoda, who presumably is currently quite miffed that he has been beaten to the second Red Bull seat by Liam Lawson, despite actually doing a pretty good job in F1 this year, 12th in the Drivers' Championship, scored the decent portion of RB's points. I guess his peaks are high, but his lows are
That does
low.
tend to happen with Tsunoda as well. But I think on the whole, if we're being realistic with where that team's and that car performance was at, I don't think he could a great deal more.
And he outperformed his teammates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Essentially, which is the key,
Right.
which is why he's
yeah.
there.
Well,
isn't
another
he?
of the key barometers in any of these sorts
and
of
it's
ratings.
interesting that he outperformed someone with a lot of experience in Ricciardo, and then he's outperformed a newcomer who's beaten him to the seat. So to promotion. So
Yes, I think perhaps there's more going on with the Red Bull second seat than just who is the best person to put in the seat. But I mean, that's an entirely different podcast.
Yes.
As we work our way down the list of more people to upset in motorsport. Right, 45. This is very much your department, I think, Gary.
Okay, we're talking about Lauren Heinrich, who of course was GTD Pro champion in IMSA. And I'm actually going to say that this was very much Jeremy Shaw's pick, that he was very impressed by him. And Jeremy is our man in IMSA. Viewers and listeners will be aware that he's also is on TV for IMSA as a co-commentator and expert voice. And he very much bigged up Heinrich. So one thing I'm going to say is when GT3 drivers make this list, and we're going to talk about some others shortly, and this does apply to them where it doesn't really apply to Heinrich. They've normally had successes in multiple series, which is the way it works. You're on the manufacturer roster for your employer, and you get sent left, right, and centre, and you do different series, different championships. And guys who make this list generally have success in multiple championships. That wasn't the case with Heinrich. And yeah, I'm going to say that I wasn't pushing for him to be on the list, and I actually raised this during the discussions.
What we got to the point where he was on the bubble in one of our meetings, so I messaged Alexander Sims, friend of Autosport, fellow young driver judge, and of course rival to Heinrich in GTD Pro, and basically asked his opinion. Kind of expecting, we were kind of edging towards maybe he wouldn't quite make it, weren't we? And then he came back with no, he's probably really impressive. And I just thought, if as you say, Jeremy's recommended him, Jeremy Shaw recommended, and one of his own rivals is saying, no, this guy's pretty.
They are the guys on the ground. I'm not on the. I'm not there. We thought, the ground.
And also it's the sort of some of the drivers on this list. I always think it's our job to put people to the forefront who you might have missed during the season if you're not following IMSA or whatever championship it is.
I think
and that's quite a nice thing to do.
You would have missed Heinrich because he's not racing in the top class.
So I'm kind of pleased to have him in there. But I do take your point that GT3 drivers do normally have multiple successes that gets them onto this list, which we'll come to in a bit. Right, number 44. Jake Hill. I mean, all the things we said about Tom Ingram, we can say about Jake Hill, except he did win the championship and he won more races.
Yeah, well, quite simple. So that's sort of in terms of this ordering. But they, both had a phenomenal season. I think, as a personality as well. I know that doesn't really factor into this list, but I think he's fantastic. He's come a long way.
He's come good this year, hasn't he?
Yeah, and he's really taken the fight to those with more experience, more race wins. I'm not saying that was going to be a factor that held him back, but he came up against some big names and has year on year progressed up the order. And when the opportunity really arose this time around, he grabbed it with both hands.
Do we think now we're going to see him up the front and become
he's,
one of those.
He's just proper, and he's just
Yeah,
cooking
I would expect
anything he
so.
gets into as well, whether it's a Ford Capri or an old Panos that he drives sometimes.
That's
He's
true.
just
His extra racing.
such an enthusiastic guy as well.
activities is mega.
Such a nice. They both Tom and Tom Ingram and Jake Hill are.
And I'm
actually
supportive of anyone born in Kent.
absolutely. And the thing that Mark Simmons actually pointed out, which I thought was quite interesting, was that to indicate the difference with Jake this year compared to last year, he had 8 fifth places. And it was those days where someone else had a quicker car, or the circumstances went against him. He made sure that he got those points. Whereas in years past, he might have tried to get fourth, tried to get third, and binned it, or had a clash and lost the points or whatever. And he's just learned. I mean, he's got Colin Turkins as his teammate, so he's seen how it's done in terms of putting a championship challenge together. But he's probably at this point in his career, he's probably got a little bit more pace. Although Turkins did have more poles, so. He was unlucky not to make the list, probably Colin Turkins and Nash Sutton, but we couldn't have 4 British touring car drivers in there. That might be a bit of a stretch.
Exactly.
Right, so number 43, the first of our IndyCar drivers who did make it then, who was one of those to force out Jason Newgarden. Pato O'Ward.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Haydn?
Defeated of Indy 500, which you mentioned earlier as well, and
5th in IndyCar, we should point out.
Certainly had some high points this year. Infrequent to the spotlight of coming under fire from India Penske's sort of president as well, as in terms of popularity and where he sat.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit harsh,
which was odd. But in fairness, shook that off well and put in some drives that.
In fact, the very next weekend, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, so
Could have won. He had some reliability issues there, and so we might have been talking about him. As a potentially champion, or at least knocking on the door.
He's a championship level sort of driver. We can say
absolutely. And I think this year those sorts of moments prove that he's here. He's going to demonstrate what he can do. I think reliability really sort of undid him at crucial moments just to put a title fight together. That's why he was never quite in that equation. But on his day, picked up the wins and did a great job.
Fair enough. Right, 42 is another Formula E driver. It's Oliver Rowland, a former young driver, winner of ours. He was 4th in Formula E, but actually he was kind of with Nissan, didn't have, because the Jaguar drivers probably should have won the Drivers' Championship. They did win the Manufacturers' Championship, and a Porsche driver won the Drivers' Championship. But actually, Rowland was the most impressive driver outside of that, really, wasn't he?
Yeah, definitely. And if he hadn't missed Portland, been unwell, he probably would have been in that fight come the end. And as you say, with the Nissan package, it was a sort of a restart, going back to the team, but put in some stellar drives to probably out punch where that team and that level were. It absolutely destroyed his teammate as well. So.
Was he a guy who was sort of is comfortable there, and it didn't really work out for him at Mahindra, and he's sort of it's like getting back in your old
I
think he's got his mojo back, But what I find is just because obviously there was a sort of sliding doors moment a few years ago between Rowland and Alex Albon, and if you look at their junior careers, Rowland is the kind of, you want to put him in a big, hairy, powerful single-seater Formula 1 car, and you think, he'll go for it in Albon, perhaps a little bit more cerebral, maybe he would fit in Formula E better. But that's not the way their careers have gone, and actually it's really nice to see Rowland really now delivering, and he would have won this new season's opener as well. He was up at the front the whole time, so I think we'll see a championship challenge from him in the 2024-25 season as well. It'd be nice to see him on the list again.
Yeah, because the first time since 2015.
Yeah, I was amazed that it's so long since he's been on the list, because he's...
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he's just not quite made it. He's lots of 51st.
Yeah, lots of... I was going to say that.
There you go, there's one of them,
right, well, let's just finish this first episode with number 41, which is Oyt Tanak. I'm going to go out there and say I was disappointed with him this year. Gets back into the Hyundai. You'd expect him to be quicker than Thierry Neuville. Doesn't win the championship, crashes, including losing the Manufacturers' Championship for them. So he's a lucky boy, I think, to be at 41. Is that fair?
I think spot on, but I guess this is a different topic, a different podcast entirely, but this year's World Rally Championship has that narrative of nobody quite fulfilled what they should be doing for various reasons, whether it was a part-time championship, whether it was too many crashes. But again, when he didn't crash, phenomenally fast, got adapted back to that car after a year at M Sport. but there were too many crashes, too many off moments, and it did cost Hyundai the manufacturer's title as well.
Which is a black mark against him, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So-
we argued him down a little bit, didn't we? I think.
Oh, was
Yeah.
there a bit of a
I
push
think.
from certain quarters for him to be a bit
Yeah,
high?
I mean, but then again, he did take the championship to the final round. He overcame some of those setbacks. He did take a couple of wins. Neuville only took a couple of wins, so don't want to overdo it. But at key moments, particularly in Japan,
Yeah.
I mean, that was quite a big shot
Yeah.
as well, wasn't it? It wasn't a little, I've run a little bit wide and clipped a log. It was into the trees type
Yeah.
job.
Maybe that shows the recency bias isn't quite,
Maybe,
because that was the most recent event, and
Yeah, well, there you go.
he
Yeah.
didn't drop any further than 41st.
No, fair enough. Well, that's it for the first part of our top 50 drivers of 2024. We'll be back soon for another episode, counting down from 40 to 31. Thanks very much for joining us.